There is not a square inch in the whole domain of our human existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry, mine.
Look over there to the south side of the public square and you see the courthouse. Courthouses are in every community, this building that stands for justice, a place of protecting rights, enforcing the law. So we see coming in and out, judges, attorneys, black robes, and Lady Justice holding her scales with a blindfold, shielding her eyes from bias. Well, today, friends, we're going to lean in a little bit more into the justice system and going to talk to a friend and a man whom I greatly respect, Jim Winter. He serves as a Supreme Court of Florida Certified Mediator. And it was in a recent conversation with Jim about court mediation that I was just fascinated, not only with how it works, but that it's a viable option. It helps ease the load on the justice system. And it is a place where Jim, as a Christ follower, can live out his values and convictions. So I'm really glad to have Jim Winter here as my guest. Jim, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Well, many of you know Nuance is our podcast about being faithful in the public square. I'm Case Thorpe, and I want to encourage you to like, subscribe, and share. It really helps us to grow out an audience. Now, I've got to know Jim through our love of our church. We do a lot of denominational work together. Jim is an elder at River City Church in DeBary, Florida, which is just north of Orlando, for those of you across the country listening. He recently served as the moderator of our presbytery, which is quite a position of honor. Jim hails from Oxford, Mississippi, a third-generation Ole Miss graduate, and served his career with distinction in the U.S. Air Force. In those 28 years, he spent 10 in Panama, 4 in Italy, 3 in Germany. Just really, really impressive. Served in Vietnam, Desert Shield, and Desert Storm, where he earned a number of medals for exemplary service. 2 Legions of Merit, a Bronze Star, a Defense Meritorious Service Medal, and Distinguished Presidential Unit Award. Jim, I had no idea. I mean, you need to wear some of those at presbytery meeting. But sincerely, thank you for your service. Jim has 1 wonderful wife, 2 children, 6 grandchildren, and a great grandchild. Jim, I never would have guessed great grandchild.
It happens before you know it.
So now, as a Supreme Court mediator, Jim has the authority and jurisdiction to settle cases of bad debt, eviction, citizens who are in dispute with one another, and even these monetary cases up to $50,000. And so that's what we're going to just explore today, how a Christian steps into the public square to see that justice is done. So, Jim, I appreciate you being here. Give us a sense. What is mediation, and do you have to have a law degree to do it?
Well, it's an interesting concept, fairly new in the sense of justice. The whole idea of mediation comes from dispute resolution. And the idea of that, and it's not just in our county. I'm in a separate circuit than you are. I'm in Volusia County, but the state itself, Florida, is one of the leading states in the program of dispute resolution. And the idea of that case is that we would give citizens an opportunity to solve their own issues between parties. So when a case is filed, and I work county civil only, but when a case is filed for county civil jurisdiction, the judge decides which cases should go for mediation. Most cases do go for mediation. And they give the case to someone like me who's trained and represents the court itself. They give us the opportunity to bring the parties together so they will have a say in the outcome of the case. If you go to the case, if the case is given back to the judge, he rules on the law. no matter what the circumstances are. But in mediation, we have a chance to hear from both sides and that they contribute to the resolution of their case.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned it's in the civil cases. Are there mediators that engage in criminal cases?
Not criminal, but family court, circuit court, and those kinds of cases, yes, they have mediation, but criminal, not criminal.
Sure. And I can imagine a mediator saves the courts tremendous amount of money and helps to get the docket clear.
Okay, yeah, they do. I think that's a great benefit. One, the best benefit, I think, of dispute resolution, it involves the citizens themselves, and they have a chance to work out their issues. The second thing is it is a great benefit to the judicial system. There's a lot of court cases that are on record that it takes a while to get through them all. And mediation takes that case away from the judge's docket, allows us to try to resolve it on the side. And then most of the ones that we do resolve. And that takes the place, and it saves the court time, saves the judge time. And he has the final authority to rule on our result of our mediation. But 99% of them are approved and it's still under the jurisdiction of the court to be sure it's resolved as they agree.
And so you say most of them are resolved. What percentage for your mediation cases are successful?
Any case that comes to a mediator is either resolved where they agree to, and we actually write up the agreement. It's like a contract, so to speak. It's a stipulation. We actually write up the agreement and they sign it. That becomes the court action. And they have to abide by that, and that is monitored by the court. Of the cases that we get, we run probably, I would say, 65 to 70% of the cases that we work that do result in resolution. The ones that don't go back to the court system, and the judge then has them in court, and then he makes the ruling on the case.
And so I would imagine it's really to the advantage of the disputing parties to get it done in mediation.
Absolutely. No, I would say one of the benefits of it is to witness this in action, because oftentimes people in civil matters, it could be neighbors, it could be a barking dog, it could be a fence, it could be a tree. And there's interesting issues that can arise between you and your neighbors or other people. But let's just say let's talk about that kind of situation. Oftentimes when something happens, hard feelings develop, they get polarized, everybody's mad at each other, and they'll just use the court right off the bat to show their anger and that they can prove that their position is right. So that gives us a chance to work with both parties. And in the mechanics of it, when we bring the two parties together as a mediator, we're in total control of the case. But oftentimes, if there is anger and mistrust or animosity between the two parties, we can separate the parties and actually mediate in two different locations and mediate back between. So oftentimes it's dispute resolution because you can calm people down, go over it with them carefully, let them know that we respect their opinion and it's their choice. We're not telling them what to do. And once they feel like that someone's really listening to them and really cares about their case, it often changes attitudes. And when we talk about the alternatives to not resolving it and going back to the court, it's in an objective way. Then they start kind of counting the costs and saying, you know what, maybe I ought to resolve this and, still walk out of here being at least talking to each other. So that's a benefit to it.
Jim, give us an example of where you've had to mediate with a real life situation.
Okay. Right now, in our current timing in society, housing is a real serious problem for a lot of people, especially affordable housing. And we oftentimes find one of the clients, one of the parties, usually it's the defendant, in a situation where maybe they have received assistance from the government for low-cost housing. And when they receive assistance from the government, they sign a contract and an understanding if they ever get evicted, then they're out of the program. But really, that's really about the only way they can make it in today's world. So we oftentimes find a person who can qualify, has good credit, they can qualify for a low-cost housing rental. So they move into the house. Oftentimes they have children, and they have the party that's the father of the child, or at least they have someone living there that keeps the children, babysits while she ends up working. Oftentimes to make it, they work maybe 2 jobs.
So this lady was working herself to death. I mean, the guy was watching the children, but was he kind of a loaf and not really leaning in a way that he could or should?
That's exactly what happens. Oftentimes, you find out that the male who's babysitting is really, he has no job. That's his job, is to babysit, and he's into other activities. And especially if he has a run-in with the law and he's incarcerated, now there's no babysitter. She's linked with him, not on the lease, because it's her name, it's on the lease.
Got it.
So what happens, she has to make some really hard decisions, and that's what mediation can really help her walk through, because often they're life-changing decisions, and she has to decide, how am I going to get the money? And my mom and dad or someone else are going to help me out. They've helped me before. And this is where mediation can really help her talk about finances and money and a continuing long-term solution. And it's very difficult because oftentimes it means that they're going to have to split up with their live-in partner, and then mom or grandmom is going to end up with the kids, and she's still going to end up working. But she can't qualify for another house unless she voluntarily moves out of the house. She can't get another low-cost loan from the government. So it's some life-changing decisions that have to be made, and that's a typical one that I just recently had.
Well, over the years, I've gotten to know different folks in the justice system who were Christ followers and were approaching their work from this desire to see justice roll down like waters. One is a federal court judge that I take my Gotham fellows to visit with every spring. And I once had a prosecutor who was an elder in our church, and she had me join her at the Orange County Jail one morning. She was in charge of arraigning all of the inmates that had been brought in the night before by the police. And wow, I was just overwhelmed at not only the issues, the system, but the amount of money that we as a society put into justice. And I'm thrilled for this. I'm not suggesting we cut back, but I could imagine in some countries, folks are just thrown in a hole and forgotten. And yet here we really live up to those values and seek to see justice done. So tell us a little bit about your faith journey, and then we'll get to how that feeds your work today.
Well, I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was in World War II, and my mother moved back home to her parents. And my granddad was a gospel singer. He was a good Presbyterian. In fact, 2 of his brothers and sisters in his family actually planted a church in the early 1900s, which still stands today.
Wow.
So, but I was around loving, caring people, but I never really committed myself as a Christian. I didn't know what it meant. I just thought I was born a Christian, that kind of thing. And I got married, and everything seemed to be going fine. But it's, life's challenges happened, and I was kind of in a situation where I was a workaholic. I didn't see my main duty is to take care of my wife, my family. My main duty was to work and be successful and climb the ladder as fast as I could.
And that's the story of so many professionals.
I know. And it's so funny how God, I always say it's funny because I love the way God works. It's so funny how things happen, but I was selected for a special school, which was away from where I was stationed at that time. And I didn't want to give it up because it would have been great for my career. So I didn't tell my wife I was selected to go until the last minute. And when I told her that I was leaving, I said, guess what? I got picked for this special school. It's for 3 months, and I'm going to be gone. Only 2 people got picked out of the entire headquarters, and I was so excited about it. And that was the work of the Lord, I'm telling you. And it was so funny. It wasn't funny at the time, but I went to the school, I checked in, and the very first meeting we had of the school, a general officer came in and welcomed us all and told us what the school was all about. And the first thing he said was, and I teach a Bible study at the Officers Club every Friday at 7 o'clock, and I want all of you to be there. And I thought, man, I've never heard this before. So I went to the Officers Club, and I sat at a table with 2 of the faculty members of the school, and both of them were self-proclaimed evangelists. And they knew exactly my situation, and they gave me a chance to talk, and I talked, and I said, I'm not sure I'm in the right place. I think I left my wife in distress, and I'm not sure what's going to happen. And I was there, and through that process of knowing them, they invited me to different things. I got involved. Then I gave my life to Christ at the school and through their ministry called Sunshine Ministry. Wow. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was just like somebody lifted the curtain, turned on the light, and I was just so excited. In fact, I called my wife at night after a meeting with them. I accepted Christ that night, and I got home about 9:30 or so, and I called my wife on the phone, and I said, "You won't believe what just happened to me." She said, "Have you been drinking again?" I said, no. She said, "What's wrong with you?" And I said, "I have accepted Christ in my life." And I said, I can't, it just hit me so hard. And she said, "What? You've always been a Christian?" And I said, "No." And at that time, I remember how God brings things to your memory. I remember the week before I left home, we were in church, and we were singing, "They know we're Christians by our love, by our love. They know we're Christians by our love." And it hit me, and I thought, am I a Christian? Yeah, I love people. I guess I'm a Christian. And that very thought, when that happened to me, I realized that was God telling me, you got to really realize what it really means to be a Christian. So it was a great opportunity. And after that, I was just so involved in so many different Christian things. So.
Yeah. Well, Jim, your story reminds me of Proverbs 31:23. The line is, "Her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the land." And you're an elder at the church, leader in our denomination, this mediation work. Back in scriptural times, I imagine the city gate was where the elders sat, the city leaders. And they primarily sat there so that they could keep an eye on who was coming and going, so that they could protect the families and those on the inside of the city walls. And that metaphor carries over throughout the Bible. Tell me how do you see your faith undergirding this work of mediation?
Well, it's interesting that because I pray about every case I get, and it's amazing in the conversation with people how they bring up their faith. And I'm not allowed working in the system to talk about my faith. But I certainly can accept what they're saying and work with that. And anything they tell me, I can repeat to them. And oftentimes, they're just saying, I've just given up. Nothing's going my way. I've lost my job. I'm getting ready to be evicted, and so I just, as we talk, I can talk on to them. Well, what have you done about it? Have you really sat down and thought about it? And oftentimes that will direct their attention, and they will say, well, I've been praying about it. I said, well, what do you think the results of your prayer are? Now I can get into that kind of thing if they said. Sure. And God will lead you right in there. And it's amazing to see when they start thinking spiritually or about forgiveness, or oftentimes it's forgiveness. And two people are so mad at each other. And if I can get one of them to realize, they need to ask for forgiveness, they've done something wrong, or in the other side, to be able to go to them and say, I think, I need to talk to you about this. We need to get it resolved. I'm willing to meet you part of the way there. Those kinds of doors open constantly in mediation. And you can't open them particularly, but your conversation can get them to think about these kinds of things. And if it's their decision when you get to that point, then you can work with that. So, and I love it. I've seen God doing some great things. People cry. I have people, they're not supposed to call me. The only time they ever get my phone number is if we sign a mediation and I happen to put my phone number on the bottom, they get a copy. I've actually had them call me at home.
Wow.
And report to me the case. I said, well, I can't talk to you on the phone about it.
Sure.
But God is so good to them. And I think it's a great way to show them that people do care about what's going on in their lives. Even at the end, and we've had some really horrible things going on, and they're faced with some really tragic things, and oftentimes they're younger people. And to show them that people do care about what they think, and people care about their choices, that is a privilege. It really, truly is.
I can imagine for some people, you're the first or one of the few they've met who are calm and loving and listening and truly hoping to find some peaceable resolution here. I've heard a lot of lawyers over time share with me that they have a great platform for bearing witness and showing love and asking the hard questions because others welcome them into those situations. And in the normal world of conversation with our neighbors, it's hard to get there to the tough stuff without looking pompous or as if you have the answer for their life. But you have an incredible opportunity that just kind of comes to you.
Well, because you speak with authority, they think you're a judge, which we explain we're not. But as far as they're concerned, our lives, their lives are kind of in our hands, and our job is not to present that position, but they think that, and I think that it puts you in a situation where they are willing to listen, and when you ask them questions, they really try to answer them oftentimes. I mean, sometimes they don't. They're not cooperative. In those cases, we probably don't get resolution, and it goes right back to the judge again. But no, I think it's a great way to serve, and it's a great way to be able to depend on the Lord for help, because you can't come right out and say a lot of things you would like to say. And you deal with some pretty hard cases of violence and sexual abuse and all kinds of things that come into play on these cases. And it gives you a chance, I think, to, like you say, so that the main thing is to trust. If they trust you, if they trust me, and in discussion, and they know that I'm neutral and that I'm not trying to, take either side, then I get a lot of progress. We can usually work toward resolution. Mm-hmm.
Now you're bringing that presence and those values of Scripture into these situations. I would hope, I would imagine, when you have a dispute and one person is a Christian and takes their faith seriously, do you see them managing the process differently?
Oh yeah, I, we're not supposed to wear anything on our clothing that indicates, that about our faith or political leanings or anything like that. But I do wear a ring. It's got a cross on it, and I don't think much about it. I wear it every day. But they'll examine you, and they'll pick that ring up, and oftentimes, they'll mention it, and I'll just say, well, I am a Christian, but, and I try to say that's not part of the decision. We're here to work with you in your decision. But
Right.
if they're a Christian, oftentimes, if they want to talk about it, and especially younger people who really don't have maybe parental help and all that, and I ask them, I can ask them, well, have you talked to your pastor? Have you been to church? Do you go to church? And those kinds of things. If they're talking about it, then I can say, I can list questions to ask them along those lines. And
Yes.
yeah, that's where you really see people that are reaching out, not knowing what to do, but starting to trust that maybe faith is an answer to this.
Well, a few episodes back, we spoke with a home builder, and he has a very high bar in terms of serving his customers well. And when there's a problem with the house after they have finished it, he will lean in and do all he can to remedy that. And he said one time a homeowner was just giving him fits and going on and getting very upset. And finally, Steve, my guest, said, "Aren't you a Christian?" Because he had learned his family's story and background during the home building process. And the man said, "Well, yes, I am." And he said, "So am I. Do you think we could just manage this in a different way?" And Steve said it completely changed the dynamic, sort of calling one account to the very values they believe and seek to emulate. And then they resolved things, and it was much more peaceable.
Well, I've had parties that actually say, well, I've been praying for you, to tell the other party, I would like to resolve this. My husband and I or whoever, we've been praying about this. We've been praying for you. And they come right out and just tell the other party, about their faith and what they're using to try to resolve it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How often would you say there's reconciliation more than just a dispute resolution, but that, like you say, people's hearts repent, seek forgiveness, and really are restored with the other?
A lot. I think one thing, as a mediator, especially a Christian mediator, I think about them. I think about their family, especially younger people. Who do they have a relationship with their parents? Sometimes they have siblings. And I just don't generally give up until I try to work towards some kind of, and I'm praying, Lord, take care of these people. And if they have, and oftentimes you will get a clue. I think God throws that out through them, but introduces the idea and the thought that they have somebody they can trust. And oftentimes that's what we say. Do you have somebody in your family you can trust and confide in and maybe work with and try to resolve this? And oftentimes we have parents evicting their families out of their own house. And that's hard.
Yeah.
Or evicting a brother or a sister out of their house. So that's a hard one to deal with. And, but it opens the door a lot if I talk to them long enough, and I think it's a spirit working, I really do. I think the more you talk about, well, what's important to you, and how long, did you have a good relationship with your sister or brother or whoever early in the life, and what was it that made you disagree and all that. And some of the questions they have to be legitimate questions, and I have to have a reason for asking them. But the door is there,
Yeah. Well, we talk a lot about at our church on missional living, of sharing one's faith through their faithfulness to their neighbors, through their Christian witness. If that is explicitly verbal on the truths of the gospel, go for it. But it's also caring about the common good. So you're doing that in such a unique way. It inspires me to think, wow, maybe in future seasons when I have more capacity, this sounds like really substantive work. What inspired you, Jim, to get into mediation?
Well, through a church friend who's had a working relationship with one of the judges in in Volusia County. The judge himself talked to her and said, you know what, you should be a mediator. We need people that can understand people and work with people and try to resolve their issues. Yeah. And she got into it. And so she talked to my wife and I, and she said, I think you guys would be good mediators. So that's how we got into it. And from there, we went to Tallahassee to the Supreme Court. We spent a week up there for training. And you have to go through process. You have to pass tests and those kinds of things. And we got certified at that point. And that was over 10 years ago.
Wow. Well, what would you say to anyone listening that feels like they might have the capacity for such work?
Well, I think the interesting thing is we have mediators that are young, that are out of, that have been through studies in one of the local schools, and or maybe in going to law school right there in Orlando. There's some law schools there, and we have students who want to get into mediation to learn more about the process to become a better lawyer. And so we have a lot of lawyers that are in mediation. But what I would say is for people like me I'm not a lawyer, who want to help, then you can contact your dispute resolution office in Orlando at the courthouse. They have a person who's in charge of dispute resolution, and ask them, how do I become a mediator? And they actually offer training there. You don't have to go to Tallahassee to do that. There's online training, and there's a process you go through, and they would love to have anybody that wants to be a mediator.
Sure. I think it's just a fantastic way to serve your community, and one that has such ripple effects for people and families and neighborhoods. Well, Jim, in closing, I always like to ask this question. Where do you feel God's pleasure in your work?
I think just watching him work, because I know his character. And I think you're in a position to always be searching for him, saying, okay, Lord, what now? What's going to happen here? What's going to happen there? What's the best way to ask this question? We have people in mediation that actually, when we first start together in the same place across a table, who are yelling 4-letter words at each other, threatening, and I have to separate them. At that point, I'm dealing with an angry, mean, spirited, hate between two people. And then I just say, okay, Lord, where do we go from here? How do we do it? And my pleasure of all of this, even our judges, we've got some great judges who really care about people. And I love to see them work, and I see the way they apply the law is fair, and they care about people. And I think seeing God's hand in all of that, to me, is just where I think God wants you to serve, and how you think, can I fit into that role or not? And the door's open. If you just ask, you will receive. He will open doors that you haven't thought about if you're just willing to continue to, seek him out first, I think.
Fantastic. Well, Jim, thank you for your time. And again, thank you for your service. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, as Jim mentioned, you can follow up and approach your own local courthouse where there's a dispute resolution office if you have need for such services. Friends, thank you for joining us today. Remember to like and share. It helps us to get out the word. Please leave a review wherever you get your podcast. That helps others find us and get promoted in the way in which the computers work. Visit collaborativeorlando.com for all sorts of content. Find us across the social media platforms. I'll say, too, on collaborativeorlando.com, you can, for free, get a 31-day prompt journal on faith and work. Just give us your email, and we'll send you this journal that takes you through a number of prompts about your faith and your vocation and helps you to reflect more deeply on that with the Lord. Don't forget our Nuance Formed for Faithfulness, a weekly 10-minute devotional podcast for the working Christian that follows the liturgical calendar. I want to thank our sponsor for today, Ben Vincent, Esquire of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I'm Case Thorpe, and God's blessings on you.